You're listening to the Free to Be Mindful podcast, which provides bite-sized tips for busy parents, educators, and anyone working with kids. These real talk conversations focus on mindful living, mental health, and personal growth, helping all to learn, grow, and inspire with mindfulness in mind. I'm your host, Vanessa de Jesus Guzman, educator, licensed professional counselor, entrepreneur, and mom. I'm passionate about helping folks live life with peace of mind and ease of heart while not losing their, well, you know, here we go. Hello and welcome to episode 146 of the Free to Be Mindful podcast. I hope that you're feeling good, looking good, and doing better in this world than you were yesterday. So I'm so excited today to share this interview with my friend, Dr. Divina Lopez, who is a pediatrician, but not your ordinary pediatrician. Her medical journey has taken her from private practice to school doctor and even to urgent care and in the courtroom. During the height of the pandemic, she shared tips on Telemundo and Univision on how to treat respiratory conditions in children and advice on using telemedicine as an alternative to in-person doctor's visit. Her overall mission is to educate new or expecting parents and give empowering advice to help them raise happy and healthy babies. She's done so much in her career, including discussions on breaking generational trauma. She leads monthly meetings and provides resources in not only English, but also in Spanish for Latinx parents. She has 2 ebooks, which are The New Mama Guide, What They Didn't Tell You at the Hospital, and The Ultimate Dad's Guide to the Delivering Room. And through her own motherhood journey, she's raising a wonderful child living with autism spectrum disorder, and she's learned the importance of advocating for herself and others. And it reminds her that she is serving a purpose in her current field of public health. I adore Dr. Divina Lopez because she always comes through with such authenticity, which you can see her on her Instagram and TikTok channels, dancing salsa and really sharing information not only for parents along with their newborn on their new baby journey, but also those parents who have children on the autism spectrum and so much more. And I really appreciate how she looks at situations and diagnoses and everything through a very holistic perspective, which makes her a master at her craft. I hope that you get a lot of information out of this interview. It is on the longer end compared to our other podcasts, but remember that these guest episodes are just once a month and they're jam-packed with information so that you can learn more about the topic at hand. Even if it's not relevant to you, I'm sure it can be relevant to someone who you know. So I hope that you enjoy this interview, and I'd love to know what you think about it. Make sure to find me on social media at Counselor V de Jesus and let me know what you think about it on there. Without further ado, here we go. Divina, thank you so much for joining us. I am so happy that you're here. And just so our listeners know, we are friends, so I just call her Divina, but she is Dr. Divina Lopez to us all. And I am honored to share space with you. Just a disclaimer, we are licensed and board certified professionals, but we are not your licensed and board certified professionals. So if you need a professional opinion, please find one. But we are happy to provide education on this important topic.
Yes, thank you, Vanessa. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I love recording with you. I think we have a great dynamic, and we're very like-minded, right? And we like to talk about the same topics, so it's a perfect fit.
Awesome. So Dr. Divina Lopez and I have recorded podcasts in the past for her podcast, and I'm so happy to have her on the Free to Be Mindful podcast for the first time. And today we are talking about all things autism spectrum disorder. But before we jump into the juicy stuff, Divina, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and how you've gotten to this point as far as your career and your passions?
Yeah, so I am a board certified pediatrician. I've been practicing since 2010, like in private practice. I've been in various offices between New York and New Jersey. I have also done some urgent care and I'm an expert witness with attorneys. And I recently was trained to do autism evaluations virtually, which I found really it hit close to home. It fulfilled a need in me to really help other parents that were looking to see what may be wrong with their child, or if there was a diagnosis or not, or how they could get services and access to the care that their child needed. And I also am, I think, a little different than other pediatricians, where I am a school doctor in New York City. That's really fun because you get to see kids in their natural environment, which is super fun, right? And then I have my dancing into parenthood. Uh, well, we have a podcast, we have a blog. I have a digital course for new and expecting parents, and I also do workshops.
I'm telling you, people, she is amazing. And you can hear all of what she does, and she just has such passion for it all, and she is good at what she does. So,
Thank
as you
you.
said, from personal experience and professional experience, when we're talking about autism spectrum disorder, it is such a spectrum, and there is so much under it. And you and I have been in the same space lately where there's just so many questions that have come up from moms and from parents as far as the things they should look out for as early as pregnancy. So let's start there before we're even holding this little creature in our arms. What should we keep in mind as far as the baby's health and our own health?
Yeah. So, I think a lot of people are not even thinking about autism, right? When they're pregnant, they're not even thinking about, thinking of signs or symptoms to be looking out for, because we always think about that after a baby is born and through their development, right? So I think it's important to talk about what are the things that we may notice or what may happen in our pregnancy that can give us like some clues to, or, little red flags that we just need to be mindful of, right? In our journeys starting off in parenthood, because your baby's history starts off with your pregnancy, right? And so we have to remember that part. One of the things that I want to offer the moms is, and I think that this is also happening more and more, is that women are having children later on in life, right? And so in the medical world, we have this thing called advanced maternal age. And what does that really mean? It means that you're having a child like, in your late 30s, right? So usually like 35 and over. Like I personally was 34 and a half. I was considered advanced maternal age. So you might see that AMA in your medical chart. That's all that means, right? And so there are some other tests sometimes that they want to send you off for, right? Some genetic testing. There might be like some extra like blood tests, or they may want to do like an amnio. And I would encourage you to do that. That may give you some more information, right? About your baby. And I always like I would always want you to have the most information so that you can make good decisions, right, for your child. The other thing that we've noticed, and this is what studies have shown, is that during like ultrasounds that are done throughout the pregnancy, they may find some defects. And what does that actually mean? Like a defect in an ultrasound means that they may see something that they're like, I'm not so sure what exactly that is. Doesn't look like it's typical. We may need to do some further investigation or some more imaging, or do ultrasounds more regularly to keep track of this. And for me, for example, my son did have they were like in the chest region. There was some sort of defect. They couldn't tell me what it was. They sent me um to the cardiologist, who had to do a fetal echo to look at my son's heart, just to make sure that the structure of the heart was fine, which it was. Everything seemed to be fine. And then I had to see a high risk doctor. So when they start, or if they see any of these signs happening during your pregnancy, they usually will be monitoring you more frequently, or sending you over to a specialist who is considered like a high risk doctor. And then that doctor will be following up with you during the pregnancy.
Oh my
Well,
goodness. Can't believe that there's so many things like from being pregnant. And I mean, when I hear AMAs, I think of the American Music Awards and now advanced maternal age. It makes
yeah,
it sounds like we're
yeah.
60 years old trying to have a baby. And, obviously there have to be markers, especially for doctors to look out for things. But I can't even imagine, knowing this information is beneficial, but then sometimes the anxious and worried thoughts that it provokes in moms because there's just so many things to look out for. But it's
Yeah.
important to take care of ourselves and to know what to look out for, even starting in the pregnancy stage.
Yeah, yeah. And then, the other thing that we need to think about is like our labor and delivery, right? So, even that is a huge part of your baby's history. And so, were there any complications during labor and delivery? I did notice while doing autism evaluations that a lot of the moms had emergency C-sections. I have not seen a study out there about that. That's just a personal observation that I have made, and something that I asked the researchers to start paying attention to. I also noticed that babies born during winter months, I felt like a lot of the birthdays fell during that time.
Wow.
And those were things that I paid attention to when I was doing my autism evaluations, only because that's what happened to me, right? I had an emergency C-section and my son was born in December. And I noticed that a lot of the babies that uh, were receiving an autism diagnosis had their birthdays, like around the same time of my son's birthday. So I was like,
That's
wow, that's
really
really
interesting.
interesting. Right. And probably another doctor wouldn't have noticed those things had it not happened to them personally, but because it happened to me, I was like, wow, I'm noticing this so often. So I did ask for them to do some research around that because I found it to be so common. And I was
Wow.
like, wow,
And I'm
this is something
so
else.
Yeah, I'm so thankful for the way that you work. And again, knowing you personally and hearing you speak, medical stuff in the past, that's why I'm really thankful of the way that you work because you come from like a holistic perspective. And it's not
Yeah.
just like checking off the boxes and like, what does the textbook say? But it's paying attention to all of these things. And
Yeah.
listeners, I hope you're being clued in on what good professionals do is they don't just sit with the information, but then they move it forward and tell researchers keep an eye out on this. Make sure to look out for that because although correlation doesn't mean causation, you just never know.
Right. Yeah. So I'm really excited to see what the studies will be showing,
Yeah.
because we're gathering so much more information. And like what I've noticed is that this diagnosis seems to be like exploding, right? And that's the reason why there's such a need for more developmentalists. There is definitely a big need for services because it just seems to be something that we're seeing more frequently.
Yes. So
No
let me
worries.
ask you about that as far as the explosion, so to speak, of diagnoses. Why do you think that is?
It could be many different things. Usually, when we start seeing a diagnosis like increase like this, it's usually because we're paying more attention to it, right? Because we're better educated about it. And so we're picking it up more. Um, I would say that that is definitely a big part of it. But I also have this idea that people are just evolving into becoming more neurodiverse. Um, I don't know if it's certain things that we're eating. Could it be like some sort of like toxins in our food? I don't know, right? I wish I had a really good answer for this because I think so many of us are looking for the answer to this question. But what I can say is that because we have more information and we're able to diagnose it better, and there are definitely more clinicians who are making the diagnosis. That is a big reason why it's happening. So where maybe in the past things were diagnosed under like um, you know, it could have been just like social awkwardness or PDD or all these other diagnoses. Now people are putting all the information together and saying, no, this really falls under the autism spectrum diagnosis.
Yeah. And when we're talking about the diagnosis, there's a three-prong criteria that children need to fit in, I believe, in order to be diagnosed on the spectrum. So can you explain a little bit more of what that is and then what we should look out for when our children are babies?
Okay, so we use this manual called the DSM-5. So like the latest version is DSM-5. And in there your child does have to meet like certain criteria when it comes to like their social emotional development. There has a lot to do with communication, and then, just the way that they are behaviorally and, certain things that we see, right? So they have to actually meet, doctors have to use this criteria, and you have to like meet certain parts of it. If you don't, then you're not going to qualify for it. And, FYI, just because it's the whole like spectrum, there are also three levels, right? So there's level one, which is considered mild, level two, which is like somewhere in the middle between mild and severe, and then level three, which is severe. Um, so like some of the signs and symptoms that we see like early on, and I want to say like you can, if a child is severe, especially, you can really notice these signs like even before 6 months, right? We usually tend to make these diagnoses, after the first year, closer to like the second or third year of life, right? But you can actually notice some of these signs and symptoms. And so I'm going to just let parents know like what are things that you may want to pay attention to, right? And bring up to your pediatrician when you see them. Babies who are on the spectrum are like they can be considered irritable babies, right? So these may be like your babies that are more colicky, they cry more, they are what I call like it can be a really difficult sort of situation for a parent, because they're trying to soothe their baby and they feel like they never know what to do for their baby because the baby just goes on and on. They can be really like picky eaters. So when the feeding starts, it might feel like impossible for some of these parents. Sometimes these babies don't gain weight very well because they're really difficult with feeding. So even the milk can be a problem, right? They may be a little more like kids that have like reflux and stuff like that. Um, and then, those are like the very early signs and symptoms. They may be like terrible sleepers. Oh my goodness, I went through that. It was really hard. I was exhausted all the time, and I was exhausted more than the normal parent.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and until this maybe the past 2 years, and my son is 10. So yeah, we never slept. And nobody believed me. Like that was the really difficult part. I think a lot of parents, they may be perceived as if they're exaggerating, right? Like even as a pediatrician now, when I look back at it, I remember some of these parents like, no, you don't understand how bad it is. And sometimes like you really just think that they're exaggerating because the early months of parenthood are
Tough.
really challenging, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes we're being insensitive to this, right? Because we're just going from room to room to room. And this is a big reason why I left private practice, because there's no time, right? To really like sit down and see how is this really affecting you? Like what is really going on? And I always tell parents, like, you know your child better than anybody else. And if you feel like your doctor is not addressing the issues and concerns that you have, then maybe you need to talk to somebody else or
Yep.
let them know, like, this is really serious for me and the baby. And I don't know how else to express it because, your baby may be thriving in a pediatrician's eyes, right? They may be falling on the curve, in the right percentage, and so it looks like baby's doing fine. What are you talking about? But you know as a parent when something just doesn't feel right, right? When you have this real concern about your baby. So I wouldn't ignore it. And if other people um maybe like push it to the side or say like let's keep watching and waiting, but you just feel like, okay, I can't keep doing this, let's not ignore this.
Yeah.
Make sure that you find someone who will. who will
Yeah,
listen,
it's so
right?
important to listen to that, I'm going to say mother intuition or parent intuition, because you definitely know. And we've had more and more conversations about this, especially recently, of the importance of feeling heard and feeling seen with your provider, whether it be for your kids or for yourself, for
Yes,
anybody. And we're not in the times anymore where we have to depend on that one doctor in the whole town that, goes to everybody's homes. You can really
right.
shop around and see whether it be one provider or a practice that fits your values and that you really feel heard, because you're going to really trust this person on their expertise and on their experience. And if you don't feel heard, that makes a big, big difference. So if you need to shop around for doctors, as I tell people, shop around for therapists, that's the way to go.
Yeah. Or you can have a good conversation with the office too and say, like, hey, what is there a time of the day that's better where the doctor can spend a little more time with me? Maybe it's the last appointment of the day, maybe it's the first appointment. But if you have that flexibility, then maybe that's a good way for you to address your concerns also, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because this is a person who is, handling your child and caring for them, and you want to make sure that you have all your questions answered. That's so important. Um, so, other things that we should be looking for in we we know that we do all of these like tests or not tests. We ask a lot of questions about their development whenever they come in, right? So we ask questions about like their development, and we're focusing on their brain development, on their verbal skills, on their fine motor, on their gross motor skills, right? And their social skills. And so, a lot of the things that people are like most familiar with when it comes to autism is that maybe their child's speech and language is not developing on time, right? It may be a little delayed. Um, for some kids, though, it's not delayed. They say many words, but they're just repeating words all the
Right.
time, right? It's just this what we call echolalia. And so they can repeat lots of things. And so it seems like their communication and language is really sometimes even advanced because they memorize these videos, and it sounds like they're using these words that a child at that age wouldn't necessarily understand how to use, but they seem to know how to say them, but they
Right.
don't necessarily know what they mean or how to use it. And they're not really having like a reciprocal kind of conversation as they get older into like toddlerhood.
Yeah, and
So,
so it could be repeating whatever they hear in real life, or like you said, in movies or in videos, and it's just almost like on nonstop repeat of saying the
yeah.
same thing over and over. And not only in their speech, correct, but also in behaviors or some repetitive behaviors that they may engage in.
Lots of repetitive behaviors. You may see that most people know the hand flapping, head banging, rocking. They do a lot of jumping sometimes. And you'll see these behaviors, especially if they're excited or if they're frustrated. They do a lot of spinning. They do a lot of like they like to look at lights. They may be like interested in certain things in a way that another child wouldn't be interested in
Right.
them, right? So they may use a toy and they may spin that wheel, and that's what they're fascinated with. They're not going to use the toy appropriately. So it's not like they're taking this car and they're like vroom 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 all over the room. It's just like it's more like they're really fascinated by the way that the wheel turns. So they get like really hyper focused on certain things. So they use objects that are not toys, but they're like really obsessed with those things. Like I had a few kids that they were like really obsessed with the fans or like mirrors, shiny things. They like
Mhm.
or if they gravitate towards certain toys, is toys that have a lot of flashing lights, toys that have a lot of like noises, sounds to them. Those are the ones that they prefer. And so you'll see how they kind of like get into the zone with those things as well. uh
I've
they
also
may
seen
also
a lot of ritualistic behaviors as far as lining things up in a certain way, and then the rigidity that comes with that behavior. And if a parent interferes with what they do, it's more than just, let's say, a toddler tantrum. If we're talking about that stage, it's really something over the top because it has to be just so.
That's right. Yeah. They get super, super rigid about certain things. And the the lining up is a real thing. So that they may play with blocks, and that's a question that your pediatrician usually uses as one of the developmental questions, right? Does your child play with blocks? And you say yes, okay, check
Of
box.
course.
Uh, but they're probably not going to play with the blocks in the way that we're intending them to use it. So it's not like they're building towers and stuff like that. They may color coordinate all of the blocks, right? And they may get really frustrated if they're all mixed up together. They may take them and they line them up in a certain way and you cannot move them. They don't even want you involved in their play because they are so rigid. It has to be this way. Or I find parents that are like super accommodating and they learn all the rules that their kids have about playing with these toys and they know that we can only do it this way. Or, kids that do have like siblings. I feel so bad sometimes for the siblings because the siblings want to be involved, but the kid is like just bossing the
Totally.
whole thing and there is no real play there. So that's another question that we may ask, like, do they play with other kids? And you're like, yeah, they play with their siblings, but are they really playing with their siblings? What kind of play is that, right?
Right.
They also don't have they lack that imagining, like they're using their imagination for play, right? So they're not usually playing in the kitchen baking you something. If they're playing in the kitchen, they may be like, again, lining up the pots or the lids or the utensils.
Right.
So we have to understand, like, what is the real play and are they having real back and forth play with other kids, or after the parallel play phase where they play around other kids but not usually with them, are they continuing that sort of play? Do they get frustrated when the other kids try to come and play with them, or do other kids not even really allow that child to come and play with them because maybe the child can't handle the flexibility of the play. So yeah, there's a lot of things. And as I'm talking about this, I just, so many things that I think about with my son. And um I remember like, obviously I would hyper focus on this stuff because I would be like, okay, I see all of these signs
Mhm.
and everybody else didn't see it. Um because I think people are just so used to having like the communication thing be a problem, and that's like the first sign for many people. And that wasn't my case. And so I remember like talking to my mom about this, and my mom was just like, are you crazy? He's brilliant, he's this and he's that. And I want parents to, again, like, even if it's your own partner who's like telling you this, if it's your mom who's saying like, there's nothing wrong with your child, but you see things that are bothering you, please don't ignore it. I can't say that enough because early diagnosis is so important, right?
Yes.
Getting the help early on is really important. Um, and I want parents to get that as soon as possible for their children, not be, in denial.
Yeah.
Because it can't even be autism. It could be something else, right? But
Anything. And you said something very, when your mom said, are you crazy? He's brilliant. And oftentimes, kids who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD for short, are indeed brilliant. And they may have a hyper focus, whether it is on a particular area where they may even memorize all types of facts, whether it be about trains or dinosaurs or whatever have you. And it doesn't mean that it impacts intelligence. They may even be more intelligent than the average kid, but we see it show up very differently. And speaking to that early diagnosis, I want to ask specifically about the age when autism definitely can be diagnosed, but whether it be autism or something else, the importance of getting early intervention in there. And for those of you who don't know what early intervention is, it's available for children up until the day before of their third birthday. Once they
oh, yeah.
turn 3, they are no longer eligible, and then they can be then they can be transferred into the public school system if you have the systems in place already, because that is also a process which we'll also speak to. But it's so important for early diagnosis and early intervention, because the earlier that you can help with whatever the issue, regardless of diagnosis, the higher chances the child has to learn the skills that they need to learn in order to be successful once they do go into school.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's called early intervention here in New York and New Jersey. Actually, it's called
Hmm.
early intervention, but in other parts of the nation, it may not be called that. There, it might be
Okay.
another name. Um, and you don't necessarily need your pediatrician to send a referral. You can also call yourself and, just explain like what are your concerns, and someone can come and evaluate your child. The nice thing about it is that in those early years, they do come to the home, they do the evaluation, and then they see whether or not the child qualifies. And another thing that I've seen happen, and this has happened quite commonly too. This is like, I've had parents tell me, like, yes, so they had the evaluation done, they didn't qualify for services, but now I notice that things are getting even worse.
Mm.
Give them a call again. Like,
Yes.
don't hesitate. It's not like, you can't pick up the phone again and just say, like, now this is what I'm seeing. Can you come and do another evaluation?
Yes.
Um,
And I want to speak to, when it comes to the evaluation, if you speak a different language, that you can request a person who also speaks that language. I'll speak from personal experience. When my son was young, we spoke both English and Spanish. And that was so very important because he was delayed in speech, but he knew some words in English and some words in Spanish. And it was important to do it in both. And while we talk about the importance of following that intuition and really advocating for your child, also understand that as parents, we want to advocate, but we are not the ones to do the diagnosis. Even you and I, as professionals in our own lanes, we should not be diagnosing our own children, because while we
right.
have that knowledge, and even, any other parent has that knowledge, we want to leave that for the professional who is treating your child. So follow that intuition, but don't say, no, he doesn't have it, because you may not be the one to make that call.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of parents have suspicions, and and sometimes they really want the diagnosis because they want services. So yeah, absolutely. Like, leave it to the professionals. Unfortunately, I feel like there is such a wait time to get in to see the professionals, and that's really frustrating. Um, but make sure that you make an appointment, that you keep those appointments, because if you lose it, then you'll be waiting again like another 6 months to a year sometimes even longer, depending on where you are in the country. So, if I feel like the fastest way to do it at this point are to do those like virtual evaluations, because there is what they're doing is that they're training like general pediatricians like myself to do them. And so now you have more practitioners, more clinicians available to make the diagnosis.
And let me ask you about that. When should parents go from their child's pediatrician to a developmental pediatrician? And is there a difference on who does the diagnosing or the evaluation?
So usually your pediatrician will give you a referral to the developmentalist, right? We can diagnose even as early as like 15 months. We can
Okay.
make that diagnosis. Yeah, we're trying to do it as early as possible, again, because the sooner you receive services, the better off your child is, right? And so we are trying to do them early on. So most pediatricians, most general pediatricians, are not trained to do the diagnosis. They can have the suspicion, and then usually they will either send you off to like the psychologist or the developmentalist, and then you'll have like a formal evaluation done. Because the thing is that it really does take a long time, right? It's not a 10-minute visit. It's not even a half an hour visit. It's at least an hour of
Yeah.
asking parents lots and lots of questions, and then doing some observation with the child and putting all the information together, because we need to use certain tests in order to make the diagnosis as well, right? So like some of the things that I just, said before about like using DSM-5 criteria. So we use that criteria. We have a questionnaire that's, based off of what of the criteria from the DSM-5, and then we use usually a questionnaire for the parents to do, like an MChat, or we also use the observation, like a CARS. And so these are just names of some of the evaluation, some of the tests that we use to make the diagnosis.
Right.
So it's usually like a psychologist or a developmentalist who will do that entire evaluation and then decide whether or not the child meets criteria for that diagnosis or maybe for a different diagnosis, and they'll come up with a treatment plan.
And so we spoke about early intervention being up until the day before the child's third birthday. If you have early intervention in place, they may help you get connected with your public school district if that's what you choose to do. So that then, once the child turns 3 or before the child turns 3, the school district can even go to your home or you can go to the school district and they then evaluate your child. And coming from the perspective of an educator, it's really important for parents to know that schools cannot diagnose your child with autism, only the professionals that Dr. Divina just mentioned. However, they can see if your child may be impacted in some way because of whatever diagnosis they have. And they are specifically looking for things that may impact the classroom. So whether it is that speech or services that may be helped by an OT or PT or any type of learning disability, but a child study team from a school cannot diagnose autism. So they may evaluate your child prior to your child turning 3. And I remember when my son on his third birthday, he went, that was his first day of school in the public school system, and then continued to receive services inside the school, in addition to services that I continued providing privately outside of the school.
Yeah, right. So, um, sorry, that's my dog. One of the things that, again, parents have told me when they get into the school is like the school psychologist made the diagnosis of autism, so I don't understand why I'm coming for another evaluation.
Mhm.
And it's just exactly what you said. Like, yes, they may have the suspicion of it and they may want us to look into this and decide whether or not it's truly a diagnosis of autism, because your insurance company will not accept it as a diagnosis. And so, parents always ask me, like, I don't understand why, because that's a psychology. And I'm like, yeah, I know, it's a little confusing, right? It can be confusing because I've even seen school psychologists put down the diagnosis like on an
Wow.
IEP. Yeah, and then it kind of puts the parents in a really like weird spot, because they're like, I don't understand, I thought the child has the diagnosis, so why am I coming to you to make to make the diagnosis again? And it really is like, because of the way we do the evaluation. So it has to be a formal evaluation with all those different tests that we use, and then putting all the information together. And, the other thing is that, like, when you are trained for this, you're also trained to look out for other things, right? So it may not be just a straightforward case of like being on the spectrum, but there may be some other things. And like, for example, we send you for genetic testing, and that's not something that's going to be done by the school psychologist. And because there is this increase in the diagnosis, many insurance companies are also not willing to pay out of pocket for these things, right? For all these services or ABA, or, you know, they want to make sure that whatever they're paying for is truly something that the child needs.
Yeah. And when we talk about our kids, when they're 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, when they're in the preschool program and then going into kindergarten, if they have been receiving services, they may be reevaluated by the school at the age of 5 before they go into kindergarten to see if they need to continue receiving services at school. And those services may change. They may decrease in frequency, or maybe they increase, whatever your child needs, and they can be given different services. services. And again, coming from the educator's perspective and from hearing a lot of parents being really scared of a classification that a child may have if he has or if she qualifies for an IEP, an individualized education program or plan. I know it sounds like a lot when you hear of special education, and special education has changed dramatically from when we were children to the way that it is now. And I want parents to really understand that it's important to have diagnoses done or evaluations done outside of school, and then child study teams to do what they need to do inside of schools as long as your child is receiving the services they need. Because as we've stated already, if we wait longer for your child to receive services, that window of opportunity may close, and then it becomes harder for your child to potentially catch up as time goes along. So it's super important to almost put the label aside and put special education aside and just allow your child to get the services that they need, because then we can see improvements down the road, and perhaps, the IEP disappears later on as they catch up and close that gap.
Yeah, and that's actually what we all want, right? We want children to thrive, and that's the whole purpose of having these services. And, like I said, starting them early, because the earlier the better. Or, even things like ABA and social skills groups and stuff like that. They're so important. So if if you can introduce them early on, it also becomes very natural for your child to have this as a part of their life, and they don't fight it. um and it's really fun for them. So for parents who think like, oh my goodness, this is gonna be something that your child isn't gonna like, it's not. Actually, they probably prefer that than being in class most of the time. Because they really do make it really fun, and they do a lot of like play, and which is so important for a child's development too. um
Absolutely. And
yeah,
sometimes when the
so
kids are young, they don't even notice what's happening. They just think like, oh, these people want to work with me and we're doing all these fun things. So again, the earlier the better, because then when children get older in fourth, fifth, and sixth grade, then they do start picking up on the differences and where they differ from their peers and what they're being pulled out for, and what they're missing to go to someone else. And then it becomes a little bit more complicated. So the earlier that we can provide these services, the better. And I
mm,
also want to speak to, in addition to the services in school, they're going to help specifically to what's happening in the classroom. If you see concerns outside of school that don't impact the academic environment, you can still continue with your own private services should you choose to, or if you're able to, so that your child is getting as much as possible and maybe a different set of skills if, again, they're not being impacted in the academic classroom.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think parents don't realize that a lot of times, that you still can do some good work actually outside of the school, right? And the school really addresses like what the child needs during school hours. So they're not going to be as comprehensive as like a private well, either a private institution or outpatient, whatever it is that you're looking for. And you can get like really creative. There's like so many, I think, new types of therapies, like water therapy and equine therapy, which you're never going to get at school really, unless you go to some specialized schools. Yeah, like I mean, if you got the bucks for that, then you'll see that as part of their programs. But that's not the usual case. So you may want to just want to explore like what's really out there. And also one thing that I would encourage is, if the whole like school all those meetings seem complicated and they're using all these acronyms that you have no clue what they are, or you feel like they're cutting services and your child's not ready for it and stuff like that, then get yourself an advocate, because that person could really be useful to help you navigate these meetings, and give you the language that you don't maybe know how to use during these meetings, and explain things to you, because they have the experience. This is what they do. So
Absolutely.
I
I'm
was
so
very
glad that you mentioned that. And that's something that I provide through my practice, Free to Be Mindful, is educational consultation. So, not quite advocacy just yet, but at the beginning, whether it is when your child is 3, 4, and 5 years old, or even older, if you think that your child has a need for higher services, whether it be through an RTI program, response to intervention, or a 504 plan, or an IEP, kind of walk you through on what that process is, specifically to the state of New Jersey with those other two programs, but then nationally with 504s or IEPs, because it's a law binding document. So everybody follows the same steps and the same laws in order to provide these services for kids. So it's something that you can get guidance for and know exactly what to look for, what to ask, the timeline of things. But then
Mhm.
once you perhaps are not given it, or if you want further services, or if they're trying to take for services away and you still see your child has a need for them, that's when an advocate comes into play and can really speak, give you the language, or can speak for you if they're allowed to come to meetings as well. So we've spoken about so many things, about the diagnosis in general, about pregnancy, what to look out for, the things to look out for when your child is in infancy stage and baby stage, and then early childhood. And we can speak, I mean, years upon years on this, and that's why there's
Mhm.
so much information out there on the topic. But this is going to be the end of our part one conversation. And then part two, we're going to talk about more when your child is in school, elementary, middle, and even high school, and the things to look out for there, and how to help our children as they grow, especially once they do have the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So before we wrap up, Dr. Divina, is there anything else that you want to add to the conversation?
Um, the one thing that I would just add that I think we didn't touch, and there's just so much that we really can talk about, even like signs and symptoms and stuff like that. Is just how children with autism really don't engage in the same way, right? Like they can be in their own world. They don't make eye contact. They don't maybe care to play with other people. They may have like a real separation anxiety with their caregivers too. Just pay attention to all of those things, to children who just seem to be in their world. I always say it's Aaron's world and I live in it. And because it feels like that sometimes. It really does. Like, they may not be as affectionate as you wanted, or, um, don't take that stuff personally. You didn't do anything wrong. I think parents have a big time guilt, like, what did I do wrong? Or how come I didn't catch this? Or, it's either that or parents can be in denial. And, that's not helpful. And if you're afraid of like some sort of label or the stigma or whatever it is, that's something that, I can definitely help you with, because I totally get it. There is a grievance
Yeah.
process that happens as a parent, because we have this life that we dream, for our children. And I think that's natural for any parent to do, right? But we also have to let go of those ideas and embrace new ideas. Doesn't mean that it's not going to be a great life. It just means that we need to like shift our focus sometimes, and that's okay. That's
And
okay.
that's okay. Yeah. And that brings up the topic of being mindful, and of not really beating yourself up, and kind of like the shoulda, woulda, could haves, and what did I do wrong, or what could I have done differently? That focus on the past, and then the focus on the future of what's going to happen. We can't change the past, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future, but all we can control and focus on is right here and right now, on you advocating for your child, on you being present for your child in the best way that you know how, and them getting the services that they need in the right here, right now, in order to help the future. So keeping yourself where your feet are.
Yeah.
Davina, I am so thankful you're here. I'd like to give you the space to share, how can people find you, where can they find you, and the services that you offer.
Yeah, so you can find me on my website is drdivinalopez.com. You can find me on social media at on Instagram now. It's dancing into parenthood underscore. On TikTok, it's also dancing into parenthood. And I'm on Facebook, but not really. So guys, really, if you want to find me, the best place is Instagram. And I would love to, just connect with anybody. You can also email me if you have questions. That's info at Dr. Divina Lopez. So it's drdivinalopez.com.
Dr. Divina Lopez, I thank you so very much, and I'm looking forward to part 2.
Yeah, so am I. Yeah, this is good information. And I hope, everybody appreciated it. Share it with your family and friends, because even if it's not happening in your household, I bet you know somebody who may be wondering all of these things, or someone that, has a lot of questions, and maybe this could be helpful for them, so pass it on.
Thank you. Thank you. So, my friends, like I promised you, what a great episode that was. For today's guided meditation, I ask that you reflect on the message which you just heard and spend some time thinking about what resonated with you the most. Was it what to look for? Was it reflecting perhaps on your own journey with your own child? Was it what you can do for your child in school? Or was it the part of what you can do in the right here, right now, which again is being present for your child or perhaps for the children who you work with? Remember that we cannot go backwards in time, and remember that we cannot control our future, but all we can do is focus on the right here and right now and be who we need to be, which most importantly of all is being present for our children. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. It would mean a ton if you took this moment to review the Free to Be Mindful podcast on the platform you catch your favorite shows. That quick and easy act lets me know what you enjoy, and it helps others find the podcast too. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you can listen along next week. In the meantime, I welcome you to catch me on social media at Counselor V de Jesus. And as always, remember, in a world where you are free to be anything that you want to be, you are always free to be mindful. Catch you next week.